Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever part of the day you're watching this video, it doesn't matter. I'm just super happy that you tuned in. Welcome to day 4, chapter 4 of Brian's Winter. Before I get into it, I want to do a couple quick shout outs like I always do. So, first off, I want to shout out to everybody that's been tuning in over the past couple of days. Keep it up. Tell a friend. More and more people have been watching every day. Keep it up. Also, I want to shout out Elijah. I saw Elijah comment yesterday on the video. So, welcome to the party, Elijah. I saw you. Next, I want to shout out Jannard. Jannard's been doing a very good job of sending in his work early in the morning to Mr. Jones every day. So kudos to you, to Jannard, because you've been working hard the past couple of days. I saw that. And just shout out to everybody who's been tuning in and watching the past 4 days. Shout out to everybody who's been commenting on the glasses challenge and voting. As you see, option 6 won today, so Mr. Jones is going to be reading in sunglasses. Hopefully, I don't mess any words up. So let's get into it. So before we read chapter 4, I want to quickly review chapter 3 and talk about what happened then so that we know where we're going and what we're looking for chapter 4. So in chapter 3, we saw that Brian previously had some issues with nature, whether it be the weather in the winter and it getting colder in the forest, or whether it be animals migrating and hibernating and there was less animals for Brian to hunt, or whether it be him having to defend himself from predators in the forest. So what Brian had to do was he had to make his items and utensils and tools that he was using stronger and better to help him survive in the winter, whether it be his shelter, his sleeping bag, his fire, whether it be his arrows and his tools to hunt animals or defend them off. So what we're looking for in chapter 4 is to see if all those improvements Brian made ultimately works and helps him survive better for the coming winter. All right, so let's get into it. Chapter 4. It was all much harder than he thought it was going to be, which of course might be said for Brian's whole life since the plane crash. But in this case, he had somewhere to start. He had made the lighter bow and had tried to make slightly heavier bows, and he thought that making a really powerful weapon would be simply like doubling the smaller ones. It was more than double, because everything was stronger. There were difficulties that would not have occurred to him. Rain came on the third day of drying the heavy bows. Luckily, Brian thought they had dried enough and set them aside in the shelter until the rain stopped. Except that it didn't stop. In the summer when it rained, it might last half a day or even a full day, but then it cleared off and dried out. Even violent storms like the tornado that had caught him and brought the plane up were short-lived. But this was fall, and fall rains were a whole new dimension in weather. It started to rain from a low gray sky, and it didn't rain hard and it didn't rain soft. It just kept raining. Brian almost went crazy with it. By the end of the first day, it was all he could do to try to find wood to keep the fire going. By the end of the second day of constant drizzle, he found himself looking at the sky hoping to see a hole, anything with bright light. But it rained steadily for 5 days, and while it rained, it turned colder, so that by the fifth day, Brian felt as if he was freezing. The only way he could find dry wood was by looking for dead logs that had hung up off the ground, and then by breaking limbs off beneath them where they weren't quite as soaked as they were on the top. By the time he got enough wood to burn for a few hours and keep the fire going against the rain, he was so soaked that it took all the time the wood burned just to get warm and dry enough to go out again and search for more wood. The inside of his sleeping bag was damp at first, then flat wet, and finally as soaked from his body and the humidity as if it had been out in the open rain. But still worse. With the rain, he did not think he could hunt, and so he had no food. On the fourth day, he found a 4-pound northern pike on his fish line, and he ate it at one sitting, saving the guts and head for bait. But he got no more fish, and by the sixth day, when it was clear that it wasn't going to stop raining, he believed now that it would never stop raining. By the end of the sixth day, he decided that he would simply have to live in cold rain for the rest of his life. In the morning of the seventh day, he sat in his bag, looked outside, and said, "To hell with it. I'm going hunting." And he did. He strung his bow and took his arrows after touching his medicine arrow for luck, and in a tattered t-shirt with the hunting knife at his belt, he set off into the rain. Hunting took his mind off the cold, and he found to his immense surprise that hunting was better during a rain than it was in clear weather. Game could hold up for a whole day or two of bad weather, but animals were governed by the same physics as Brian, and rain or no rain, cold or no cold, they had to come out and eat. He took a full bird not 40 feet from the camp and got 4 shots at 2 different rabbits within another 20 yards. He missed the rabbits, but was satisfied with the full bird and went back to build up the sputtering fire one more time and made a hot stew, including the heart and liver and a tough muscle he thought might be the gizzard, which he had come to like, and ate it all before falling sound asleep in his wet bag. He slept hard, In spite of being cold and damp, but in the middle of the night he opened his eyes, instantly awake, and waited for his eyes and mind to tell him what had awakened him. No noise, nothing. And then he realized that it had stopped. There was no rain falling, and he peeked out of the shelter to see a night sky filled with the stars and a sliver of a moon, and he looked up at them and softly said, "Thank you," and went back to sleep. In the morning it was cold, truly cold. He saw his breath in the dawn sunlight coming through the opening, and when he looked outside, he saw a ring of ice 4 or 5 feet from the edge of the lake all around the shore. He stood up out of the bag, shivering, and got the fire going until it blazed merrily, and then sat close to it, watching the sun come up while he warmed himself. When he had stopped shivering, he brought his sleeping bag outside and spread it in the sunlight away from the fire so that no sparks would hit it, and left it there to dry. Within an hour, the temperature was in the comfort range, and Brian stretched and let the sun cook his bones for a few minutes. The ground was still damp, but he sat on a dry rock and looked at the blue sky and felt the hot sun, and it was as if the days and days of rain had never happened. A kind of lethargy came over him, and he just wanted to sit in the sun and try to forget the last week. He closed his eyes and dozed for a few minutes, but a new sound, high and almost cackling, cut into his doze, and he opened his eyes to see a flock of geese high above, heading south, migrating. It was a reminder. It did not get things done sitting. And in the back of his mind was the thought that he had just had a warning. A week of cold rain to show him how poor he was, how completely unready he was for what he knew now was coming. And today, the geese to cap it. He must work now, work hard, or he would not make it. No matter how nice the weather might be, he knew he had no time left. First, the shelter. He had to make the shelter cold-proof and rain-proof. That meant sealing the fire inside and closing the door in some way. But he thought the smoke would drive him out. Still, he thought, they did it. The people who came before him had tents and teepees and caves, and they did not have stoves, so how did they do it? He took kindling into the shelter and made a small fire, and closed off the opening to see what would happen. As he had predicted, the smoke quickly filled the small enclosure and drove him coughing and spitting out into the air. He had to let the smoke out. They must have known a way. What did they do? Teepees just let it come out the top through a hole. He's seen that in movies, old westerns on television. Brian went to where his wall met the rock and made a hole about a foot across just above where he had made the fire, then tried it all again. This time, when he closed the door and put some sticks on the fire, it started to smoke again, but as the heat developed, it rose and carried a small draft through the hole in the ceiling. There was a moment of smoke, then it all magically cleared, and Brian was sitting in a snug little hut with a warm fire facing his face. Clearly, it would take only a small blaze to keep the little shelter warm, which meant less wood would be required. The side of the shelter was still far from airtight, but about this Brian knew exactly what to do. He had spent one whole day watching a family of beaver mix mud and sticks to make a watertight dam. He spent 3 hours bringing up double armfuls of fresh mud from the lake to pack into the low wall with sticks and leaves. When he was done, he covered it with another layer of brush to protect the mud, and when it dried by nightfall, he had a truly weather-tight shelter. He still had to seal the door, but that night he sat with the fire warming the inside of his home and knew that as long as he had wood and he was living in the middle of a forest, he would stay warm no matter what kind of weather came. He slept so soundly that night that the bear could have came in and tore the place apart, and he would have not known it. In the morning, he mudded the door and set it aside to dry and used more mud to make a seal on the wall, smooth and tight. Then he set back to work on the arrowhead problem. So I want to stop there really quickly before we move on, and I want to talk about the shelter that Brian had to fix. So we saw that he fixed it up in chapter 3, and I thought it was good after that. But for some reason, he still had to make some more improvements to the shelter. So based off what we just read in chapter 4 so far, why do you think Brian wanted to make even more improvements to his shelter? What did he have to do, or what was the reason why he had to make his shelter even better? What was missing from his shelter that he had to do to make it better? So I want you to pause the video here, either write your answer down, stop and jot. You can say it out loud. You can talk with whoever's watching this with you. You can type it out and send it to your teacher or Mr. Jones. But I want you to think about that right there. What was the reason why Brian had to make more improvements to his shelter? Then we'll get right back into it.